within their domain, that is, they will domesticate access to information law at the county level and reach wananchi. So structurally, we have put in the structure, we have implemented it, and one of the area where we feel that we open up public participation and access to information and providing of information by government office is by the curriculum which I stated we are working with the government, with the Kenya School of Government, whereby access to information or being open to the citizens will become a culture, or we hope to educate public officers to inculcate in them the culture of disclosure, the culture of giving information. And this will not be done by CJ. It has to be done with other partners who will be actively educated by Kenya School of Government and Commission on Administrative Justice. I also want to state clearly that we also want to monitor online access to information, and there is a tool which we have developed. We want to implement it as soon as it's possible, and we do have officers who have been trained on the monitoring tool to check what government is implementing. On the issue of those officers who did not get access to hospitals, so to speak, we did receive requests, because you won't know, you can't act unless you know. We did receive requests from such citizens, and we acted on the request, and we called certain hospitals, we even called government officers, and some were assisted. Some you may not know, and we have it on our record that we did act as and when the citizens were active and called upon us to act. And finally, I want to say that all social media in government offices have been active, and we must recommend ourselves that we are doing well in terms of providing information than before. I am of before. I know how it was 10 years ago and how it is today. With the constitution in place, we have opened up, and it is important that Kenyans recognize that we have moved from where we were, the culture of secrecy, and we are getting towards open government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lucy, for your response. And I'd like to continuously thank our panelists for the contributions that you're making to this discussion, as well as the attendees. I can see some attendees who have their hands up, would like to ask questions. I'd like to notify you that we're going to be having a Q&A session towards the end of this panel discussion. There's also an anonymous attendee who says they have a burning question. If the question is very burning and you can pray to the end, you can just type it out, then we'll see if we can pick it and share it with our panelists. But for the comprehensive Q&A session, we're going to have that towards the end of this panel discussion. So I know there's a hinting that Vincent made that he'd like to share more about police brutality and the history behind that. But before I come to you, Vincent, on that, I'd like first to go back to something Isabella had also hinted that there has been an increase in reported cases of human rights violations. And Isabella, as you share that, I'd like for you to talk also about the government's role in ensuring access to the right to health. We realize that the government has done, a commendable job in combating COVID together with the citizenry, but we also recognize that we did not put a pause on all the other diseases and infections. So there has been an increase in other communicable diseases and also other non-communicable diseases. We've seen an increase in the number of children who've missed their immunization schedules because of the fear that, when their parents take them to hospital, they're going to contract COVID. We've also seen an increase in the number of reported TB cases in the country. So what does government's role look like, or how well has the government ensured access to the right to health, even as you share the increased cases of human rights violations that have come through your organization, Isabella.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, Isabella, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I think we were having an issue with our internet over here, but let me keep it this way, so then I'm sure that we are able to communicate, yeah? In the event that you can't hear me, please let me know. Thank you for that question. I've noticed that you've tied that particular issue of the right to health, you've tied it together with police brutality. So I'll split the two and then answer accordingly. So in terms of the right to health, I want to admit that the government has indeed taken measures to ensure that the human right to enjoyment of proper health is there. The structures have been set. That I must admit. I mean, we've seen issues to do with specific areas being cordoned off. There were no travel. There were restrictions, probably in terms of people going to bars, wearing of masks, ensuring that people get home in good time in terms of curfew. So that has been set. And that is commendable specifically because it goes to show that a government is aware that its people, rather the people have to be protected. The government is also keeping in mind that in the event that this pandemic hits, we may lose all our people. And you can tell that there is a recognition of the current health capacity that we have in terms of hospital beds, expertise, and resources. That is all right, and I commend them for that. However, now, these particular measures that have been adopted to ensure the highest attainable human rights to health have another implication, which I will speak to specifically in terms of police brutality. So yes, we are trying to ensure that our people are protected, but how are we implementing these adopted measures, right? And we understand that the right to health is closely related and dependent upon the realization of other human rights. That is something that we're cognizant of. So we really can't split probably health from the security of the person or maybe health from economic rights. So having said that, now let me speak to the issue of police brutality. And this is specifically due to the enforcement of the adopted measures. And we have received a high number, specifically between March and March 2020 and February 2021. And the issue of police brutality has been glaring because it denies people access to health. And I'll give specific example. For instance, if one person is unwell, but they are not able to get past, for instance, a roadblock, specifically because they're enforcing maybe a restriction or maybe a curfew order, and this person loses their life, have we allowed them the enjoyment to right to health? There's a balance, there's a lack of balance in terms of enforcing the adopted measures and ensuring that the right to health is in place. And then we also have the issue of now forcefully enforcing, and we saw that people were being beaten, others were being picked out of their cars. We've had issues of shootings. We've also had issues of people being attacked in their houses way past curfew, in as much as they were not even violating any type of rule or rather measure. And so that then brings me to this particular area where we're now saying that the government is adopting measures, but are they ensuring that people are enjoying their health rights? Because now we are seeing an issue of twin crisis. Twin crisis meaning that we have the pandemic itself, and then we have the misappropriation, or rather the improper implementation of those measures as adopted. And when I speak of twin crisis, we mentioned the issue of people dying of malaria. We noticed an area where we saw people who are living with HIV and AIDS were not able to access their ARVs. And we've known that the number of TB, we know how many people normally die of TB. I'm told per minute it's more than 5 to 6 or even 7. Someone would give us the statistics. And are we then saying that as a government we are going to specifically respond to COVID and now turn a blind eye to the other people who have other issues, probably say diabetes or cancer? Yeah. So I think in as much as we are setting up these structures to ensure that our people enjoy the highest attainable human rights, we then need to make sure that we strike a balance between that, the implementation of these measures, as well as all these other health issues that come outside of COVID-19. And this should be done with an appreciation of the fact that COVID-19 is going to be with us for a very long period of time. We do not know when. As long as one person in this world has COVID, then it is still around. How then do we balance that particular fact in mind to the fact that we have social and cultural rights that have to be enjoyed, we have economic rights that have to be enjoyed, and we also have to have state agencies maintaining law and order as well as security of the person. That would be my weighing in on this particular question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabella. And moving on to Vincent. On the same question, I recently read an article that said that the government has treated Kenyans not as partners to be consulted, but as a defiant, well, they said a defiant child, but I don't believe children can get to that level. I'd put a horse, I'd say treated as a defiant horse that was actually beaten to submission. So the article said, the government has treated Kenyans not as partners to be consulted, but as a defiant horse, quote unquote, that needs to be beaten to submission in its response to COVID. And it was a question about whether we are in a state of emergency in the government's pursuit to provide the right to health. Vincent, are we in a state of emergency, and what has the government done enough to ensure the enjoyment of the right to health?
Yeah, thank you very much. Are we in a state of emergency? The answer to that can be different. If we look at it from a legal perspective, then the answer is no, because there are parameters that define what would be a state of emergency. However, if you look at it from the understanding of ordinary parlance, then we'd say that if you are having a pandemic, then you have a state of emergency. I'm employing those words now in their ordinary meaning of terms. So I think, in my view, that the government has done moderately well in trying to combat this pandemic. I mean, we've seen even county governments doing the much they can to try and provide facilities. We've also seen information trickling down to Mwananchi on how they can, try and prevent the disease, which is important because we wouldn't know that we're supposed to put on masks if the government didn't say. And so to that extent, I think that the government has done well in trying to combat the disease. But again, at the same time, I think there's opportunity to do even better. Because in my view, there's still room for a lot of improvement in terms of provision of equipment in our hospitals at different levels. Much as the government has tried to equip those hospitals at the county level and all that, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and it would go back to prioritizing, looking at this pandemic, and then prioritizing how we budget as a nation. How much are we willing to put into the health sector? So for me, I would think that in that respect, then there's a lot of room for improvement because we can budget more so that we have a healthy nation. I wish I had read the article, so I'm hesitating to comment on that quote that you gave because I've not had the benefit of reading the entire article. But that would be my response to this.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Rightfully said. And just stemming from your response, I'd like to go to Commissioner Lucy, how has the government ensured the rule of law in, responding to COVID? How has the government ensured the rule of law in responding to COVID?
Thank you. And I want to state clearly that the government has and is continuing to comply with the rule of law during COVID. How did they do that? As a commission, we did witness the guidelines which we saw being circulated in the whole Republic of Kenya. And these guidelines touched on all of us, and they were supposed to be implemented by not just one government agency, but all government agencies. What we did as a commission, we tried to put them in many websites as we can, and to ensure that this was done. Further, government has also to obey access to information law. Unfortunately, or as it should be, we do know that we have Section 6, which deals with limitation, which relates to national security. And within that national security protection, you may feel like certain activities are not happening, but they are happening, but not disclosed. So government is working very hard to try and contain pandemic, to try and ensure economy is going on or development is going on, to try and even limit police brutality, as you are saying, using the lay-down procedures, but that information is limited. It cannot be accessed by Wanjiko or Lucy. It is limited, and you can only agree which one do you want and which one should be protected. And how does it happen? The same act provides that you can write to the institution, and if it is denied, then the commission comes on. That is how we have tried to protect the rule of law. And we must still remember that the Constitution is alive, even during COVID-19. Government must learn, Wanjiko must be protected, and pandemic must be contained. So the rule of law must be weighed always. You cannot bash without asking, what did you do in certain circumstances? Were you within the law? If you are not within the law, what did I do? And you felt aggrieved. Did they seek services from the relevant institution? That's what I can say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lucy. I'd like to invite my colleague to bring in some further questions from the public that are relevant to this conversation.
Sure. Now, there's one question that I'd want to ask, actually two questions, and then we'll move into the next sector of the discussion. And one of them is from a member of one participant who is asking about how, to what extent do we make sure that the recommendations that you have given from your office, Honorable Commissioner, are enforceable? How do we ensure that, for example, the guidelines that you have talked rightly about, you've issued to several executive offices, how do you ensure that those guidelines are followed? And in an instance where they are not, what is the fallback plan to kind of try and enforce them? Because then that looks like our only security to ensure that human rights are protected.
I should answer that?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Under our act, that is access to information, the decision of the commission or the determination of the commission has the force of law, like a court of law, and it is clearly stated. So if we issue a circular, if we issue a determination related to a request for information, that determination must be treated as enforceable of law. It is an order. so to speak, although I will not use the word order, we use a determination from the commission. And what we have done is ensure that such determinations or such advisory opinion are implemented. We do follow by calling the institution or the requester and ensuring that their request is given. If it is not given, we also have the right to go to court as a commission to protect now our mandate, and that is the fact, which we sometimes resort to when we have cases in court. Others, we have seen requesters moving to court using our letters or our determination to try and enforce our determination. That is how we try to implement our guidelines and our advisory opinions.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. And just staying with you for a moment, there's a question on COVID-19 statistics, and the question is, I have a question to the Commissioner. Does the COVID-19 statistics form a part of the information to be withheld under Section 6 of the Act? If we could get a comment on that, and then we'll proceed to just explore the area of police brutality at length.
I want to state clearly that we have the data protection law, which is now in force, and within data protection law, certain information related to health is truly personal, and that one cannot be disclosed to the public. However, there is certain information related to COVID-19 which must be disclosed. That is like the usage of funds, the contractual agreements, and also the steps being taken by government to implement COVID-19. Those are enforceable under Section 5 and must be disclosed. But issues of personal data cannot be disclosed. That is what I can say to that. So we have two levels: areas which can be disclosed, areas which cannot be disclosed. Statistics, numbers can be disclosed, but not personal data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Commissioner. And just to turn the leaf a bit to what Vincent had alluded to before, the conversation around police brutality, especially on the enforcement of the COVID-19 protocols over the year. And my question to Vincent would be, we have a history as a country of a lot of police brutality, including the use of torture, in maybe getting information to use as evidence in court, and many such human rights violations. But this is also a situation where the government is trying to limit the right to movement because we have to protect ourselves from a virus that they say cannot be seen. But to what extent then are the police then allowed to use force? And do you think that then they have a justifiable reason to use it to the extent they have in the past year? Over to you, Vincent.
Thank you. I think we have many laws which are supposed to be implemented insofar as security, internal and external security is concerned, and I will only confine myself to access to information. The other laws are known, basing them on our constitution. And what we are saying is that police brutality should be condemned at all times. And the access to information, if you feel that you have been aggressed by a police officer through police brutality, you have a right to seek information and to ensure that that police is properly brought to book. That one, we are agreeable. We are also aware that under access to information, we are not supposed to work alone. We are supposed to also train policemen, security officers to know the limitation. How far is this limitation under the Act going to be? Because if it is somebody working outside the purview of their law, definitely they are not protected. And that is the duty of the Commission to train police. And the curriculum I'm talking about, it has a chapter on the limitation and national security, which we hope to partner with government agencies related to security. That's what I can say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Commissioner Lucy. And just to add to the question a bit for Vincent and Isabella, and we could start with Vincent. Looking at police brutality as has been, and then looking at it during and before COVID-19, during COVID-19, and the work that AJM and IMLU has been doing regarding the working group on police reform, how is there progress? Have we made progress to, on that front, or there's still extremely sticky issues that we need to deal with that, even when we audit the 10-year constitution, we cannot see a lot of progress yet? Maybe we could start with Vincent, then Isabella will come in.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Now, to understand police brutality is a difficult task because it has got historical perspectives. Yes, whereas it is true that we saw an increase in the human rights violations over the COVID period, but COVID and the enforcement of curfews just provided yet another reason for police brutality, and it has a long history, starting way back from 1907, when we had the first establishment of a semblance of a police force. And you find that this police system was established in a way that it was to protect the interests of the administrators. At that time, we had the Imperial British East African Company, an offshoot of the British East India Company. And the police had been established to protect their interests. And when you look at how the police system developed, you find that the training was, more emphasis was laid on paramilitary sort of training as opposed to technical training. Over the years, the police were used, even during the colonial times, the police were used to protect political interests. In fact, when you look at the state of emergency that was there in 1952, the police were used to protect political interests. And even coming to after independence, you find that the police were still being used as a political tool of suppression. And anyone who had other dissenting political ideas, then you would unleash the police to them. Even after the first regime and coming into the Moi regime, you still found that the police were trained that way, and that's why it was called a force and not a service, as the 2010 Constitution has now done. Because that was the thing. And so the philosophy within the police system, in my view, is that you protect the interests of the administrators. And so anyone, including the citizen, who goes against those interests, then he becomes a perpetrator in the eyes of the police. So that historical perspective is very important to understand that even as we are coming to the COVID period, there are systemic issues that cause impunity within the police. Other issues include, for example, ethnic hegemony. In fact, even coming to the time of independence, the top echelons of the police were all white. Yeah, and even after elections, we find that the top echelons of the police were people from ethnicities that the rulers considered they could trust. And in fact, it was even perfected much more during the Moi regime. And that's why in those days, and I still think even up to now, if you wanted to imitate how a policeman speaks, you had to speak in a certain accent, because there was a lot of, ethnic hegemony within the police system. So all these things looked at together, and the culture of force that has been inherent within the police system is what informs police brutality. And so when we came now to the COVID period, it just provided yet another reason why we would have police using force to enforce the curfew, because that is the language understood within the police system. So there are some things that we can do as a nation to try and change all that. But at the same time, it also be understood that police work under very harsh conditions. and under very poor conditions. Some of them have very poor working conditions. Even when you are seeing now them sometimes turning against themselves, they are working under very high stress levels that need to be managed. So there are fundamental issues that we need to address when we are talking about police brutality. And we need to understand it from that perspective, learn that perspective, and then see how do we deal with the systemic issues. That's what I can say about that.
Maybe just to stick with you, Vincent, for one more minute, and to look at it from, well, we have a very, very difficult history, so to speak, between the citizenry and the use of police force in enforcing whatever it is, ranging way back into before 2010. And what, you know, while that is a standard we seek to move to, the standard of no police brutality at all, but have we improved in our accountability mechanisms? Are we able to hold police accountable successfully? And how does that then affect or help the discourse around the reduction of police brutality in the country, especially post-2010?
And no.
Okay.
After 2010, the Constitution established an oversight agency, the National Police Service Commission. And the idea was to address issues of transfers, issues of poor working conditions within the police system and all that. Later on, we had IPOA being established by statute to provide civilian oversight over the police. And so, in a way, the Constitution provided an opportunity for there to be improvement. For example, one fundamental thing was the fusion of the police with the KPS, the Kenya Police Service, and the administration police, which is fused in law, though practically it is still not used up to today because it has been difficult to implement that. And so, whereas you find that the constitutional platform has provided an opportunity for there to be a lot of improvement in that, but there's a lot that needs to be required. For example, there is need to put a lot more resources in training of the police. When we are doing recruitments, you find that more emphasis is placed on physical attributes and fitness other than technical expertise. So it is after they pass the physical test that they are then taken to Kiganja or whatever, for some technical expertise. So this poses challenges. So we have to make deliberate efforts as a nation and say we want to infuse more resources in their training. We want to look at to improve the qualifications, so that then we can get better service. However, if we just legislate and even establish institutions such as IPOA or the National Police Service Commission, but then we don't put in resources, even sometimes adequate resources to support those very oversight institutions, then it becomes difficult to improve the system. So that's what I can say. But it is unfortunate also that when you look at now where we are going, when you look at the proposals in the BBI document, you find that it will take us a step back as regards the police. Why? Because the main functions of the National Police Service Commission they're going to be transferred back to the police. So the police will be the main oversight over itself. And so that would be retrogressive. And hence why I was saying that yes and no. We've seen some improvements, yes, but no, because we've not put in enough to increase the technical capacity of the police.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vincent. I'll allow you, Isabella, to come in and just give your comments, and then I will add a question in the same discussion as we proceed.
Thank you so much for that question. I want to limit myself to the very first question that was posed to Vincent, because I know you've tabled other questions that maybe I could answer later. But first, I just want to talk about the balance in terms of enforcing probably a measure and taking care of the person you're trying to protect. And for me, I still go back to the principles I had alluded to, and when we are looking at how the police, because they are the key state agencies in terms of ensuring that we curtail the spread of this particular virus that has been upon us for a while. And some of the things I would want to mention is that as we are trying to ensure that our people do not succumb to this particular pandemic, then there are standard minimums that we should then align ourselves to. For instance, are these measures that have been adopted, do they provide, or are they carried out in accordance with the law? And specifically when we start with that, then we see that there is an issue in terms of compliance with the law. And I know Madam Commissioner had spoken to something close to this in terms of the government aligning, or rather ensuring that they are respective to the rule of law during this particular period. And I also want to talk about these particular measures being directed towards a legitimate objective, of course, in terms of a general interest, and that the prerogative being protection of health. And that is legitimate, or rather it is proper, because we've seen that they are trying to ensure that people don't succumb, and we've seen the numbers and what they look like. Another thing I would want to talk about is the necessity, or rather the strictness in terms of this particular adoption. Are they aligning to the democratic society that we live in? Are these things just copy-pasted, or rather picked from other entities and brought to us as Kenyans, and it does not fit? Have we seen anything to that effect? And yes, we have. We've seen, the implementation, or rather the adoption of certain practices that may not fit us, and they are quote-unquote geared toward protecting the people of Kenya. And the other issue I want to talk about is, are we enforcing these measures in a way that is least intrusive, or rather least restrictive, in terms of ensuring that we are attaining the objective of protecting people against, a very big number of deaths? I don't really think we've attained this, because the measures that we've used have proved to be very intrusive. We've seen officers arresting people in their houses. We've heard of cases of persons who are raped upon arrest during either curfew hours, or even probably because they were not wearing masks, or flouting any other curfew rules. And the other one I want to talk about, the specific science evidence that has been used to inform some of these measures that have been adopted by the government. Because if we see that we have proper numbers, and then we have specific scientific backing to inform the zoning probably of a given area, or the quarantining of people for 14 days and other 21 days. And the other issue I would also want to talk about is, are we looking at the duration that we are enforcing these particular measures? Is it limited? Is it respectful to human dignity? Is it subject to review? And we've seen a review. We've seen a review. I mean, the other day we heard that the curfew has been reviewed for another 60 days. Have we seen a review in terms of the police brutality cases? Have we seen comments or other statements talking about the measures, or rather the force that has been used? And this brings me now to the second issue of the use of it, or rather the use of the force that has been seen to have been used. We've seen people who are killed, we've seen people who are shot. And I'll go back to the National Police Service Act, specifically the 6th schedule. This indicates that there are instances a police can use force, specifically force or non-violent force. But generally, in terms of the cases we received last year, we had reported deaths as well as injuries in terms of use of excessive force. So having said that, then I go during and after COVID, period of after COVID. But before, there were glaring gaps. There were issues in terms of police brutality. Definitely there were cases, but this has been brought to the forefront during the implementation of the COVID-19. There we saw staggering of numbers. And now where we sit today, 3rd June 2021, we are now faced with two things: the implementation of the regulations, or rather the measures to curb COVID-19 spread, and now we are faced with the electioneering process. We are already in that particular period. How do we balance this? Because we keep in mind that issues of police brutality have been very open in the past few elections. And we do not want to talk about, 2013, 2007, 2008. We saw what happened then. Now we are here, we've seen what happened during COVID-19, and now we are already getting into the electioneering process. What then do we expect in terms of police brutality? And I know Vincent spoke about, training and mobilizing resources to ensure that we enhance the capacity of duty bearers. And definitely we believe that also right holders need to know what their rights are and how best to ensure that these are implemented. And for that, I would recommend that we then, from this particular conversation, start looking around areas of prevention rather than responding, because I know we have been limited to see responding. So then when we see a case of police brutality, we will go and offer medical support, psychological support, counseling, or maybe we go to court. How about we take a step back and say, okay, fine, we have seen these issues during COVID. We've seen this during both times. What is it that Kenyans, civil societies, government, stakeholders are going to do? And definitely that preventive approach is something that we really want to work hard towards. So then ensure that in as much as we're doing through this period where we've seen very bad numbers of police brutality, we are hoping that they will drop through either advocacy measures, capacity building, and so on and so forth. That would be my comments for the very first set of questions posed towards me and Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabella. Commissioner Lucy, we want to give you an opportunity if you have something to add before we add another spanner in the works, so to speak.
Clearly that we have seen action being taken against police in their brutality. We have seen police being taken to court, and we have seen them even being sentenced. And that should be on record, that due to our progressive constitution, we are seeing progress and human rights are being implemented. They may be piecemeal, but something is happening. And that is a point I want taken, that our courts are taking action against police brutality. Also, I want to state clearly that perhaps there is a need to know, do they really know that we have a constitution, we have the rule of law, and we have the implementers of the rule of law? Do they know that they should not go towards that direction of police brutality? And that is where, like our speaker stated clearly, we need to partner, and partnership is key. We need to tell them and tell them again, this is the consequence, this is the law, this is the mandate, and we must all live together in this country. We must fight the pandemic together. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If I
Yes, Isabella, you can come in.
Yeah, just quickly, a minute. Thank you so much, Madam Commissioner, for that particular noting. I want to reiterate that it is true there have been police officers who have been arrested and brought to book, in terms of various actions of police brutality. That is commendable. We've seen judgments so far. However, we would request that then the government moves with the same speed in terms of prosecuting and investigating and, of course, successfully bringing to book these particular perpetrators. We do not want it to be specific to certain small groups. We have seen instances where the government just goes quiet. And we have seen that they have the muscle to both investigate and prosecute. How about we do the same for all these cases that are brought? And true, if we bring a person who has been accused and they are found not guilty by the courts of law, that is fine. We respect the rule of law. We respect courts, and definitely we want to adhere to their orders. If we have the same muscle, then how about we spread it across all the cases, definitely to deter any other activities of such nature, and to also set a precedent where the government says that if you act ultra vires, or rather you use excessive force in any given instance, we will do what we need to do in terms of investigating, definitely apprehending you, investigating, and prosecuting you accordingly. That was my comment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Isabella. And just staying with you for a minute, Kenya in 2017 passed a law to have an independent forensic unit created. We are here, and I think that has not been done. This work has largely been done by IMLU so far. How has that been, and how does that relate to holding, police to account? And how has, what challenges do you face while, conducting this kind of work?
This particular service that you're talking about is specifically enmeshed under the Coroner Service Act 2017 that was assented to. Up until today, the Act has not come into force, specifically because of some of the challenges due to drafting, as well as some of the requirements in that particular Act. And I'll speak to one. One of them being that there was a Coroner Service Commission that was supposed to be set up to set the office of the coroner. And without this particular service, then the Act itself is not able, rather, quote unquote, to pick up and be effective. I think yesterday we had a small meeting in terms of seeing how best to proceed. However, our last interaction with the relevant state agencies indicated that now there's a particular commission that is being set up, and we are hoping that that particular commission then will sort of accelerate, the enforcement of this particular act. And just to speak further to that act, you understand that the Office of the Coroner is being established to essentially push issues to do with inquests. Inquests essentially look at four things: who died, why they died, when they died, and how they died. The moment we are able to answer these particular four questions, we are able to either go to a criminal court or concurrently also go to a civil court. So in terms of addressing issues of police brutality, you understand that some of these cases end up in death. For instance, death in custody, or maybe someone has been shot in a crowd and you are told, this was a stray bullet. Or probably someone was brutalized or tortured and they die. So if it is not known exactly the circumstances surrounding this particular death, an inquest would be the next best step legally. So when this particular inquest is handled, say in a criminal court as it is currently, we have seen that there are some delays. And during this particular inquest, we have suffered something known as the Blue Code of Silence. The Blue Code of Silence specifically is an instance where the boys in blue protect each other. For instance, in terms of producing evidence that would be useful in investigation, or maybe any documentation or ancillary paraphernalia that would be useful in terms of ensuring that an inquest is successful. A specific person is placed at either the scene of crime or linked to a particular death, and then we proceed with criminal or civil prosecutions. So if this particular act is enforceable and it is useful, and we have a coroner's commission, or rather a service, then we are able to know that the coroner's office is set up. And if it is set up, the manner in which we are going to be undertaking inquest will be very, very different from what it is that we do now. I want to appreciate that the courts are doing a good job, but definitely we will be more effective in terms of ensuring that inquests do not suffer the small legalities that we have been suffering. And we will be sure that in the event that we have an inquest, we are sure that we will be making some strides in terms of prosecuting this particular cases of deaths, specifically under police brutality. And I'm not saying that everyone who dies has been brutalized, but then that would be a question that is answered to an inquest. In the event that someone was maybe arrested and they had malaria and they died a natural death, but specifically in police custody, the inquest under the coroner's office will be able to show us that. So then we are able to separate that this was a natural death and this was a death that was caused probably by brutalization by a state agency. So that is something that we have worked on. I also, now that we're talking about this particular act, I don't know if you're aware of the Prevention of Torture Act that was also brought to book. Up until today, we have not had any charges specifically based on that act. We have also had some stakeholder engagement in terms of pushing for that particular act to be useful. And as a team, through with other CSOs, we've also developed something known as the Rapid Response Guide, which will enhance the charge sheet. So then we are able to see prosecution specifically under that particular act. So Porter and the Coroner Service Act tied together will be a great step. Will be a very, very great step in terms of us ensuring that we see a reduction in numbers in terms of cases of police brutality and enforced disappearance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll yield the floor to my co-moderator to finish up on that theme.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'd like to go back to Vincent a bit on the issue of police brutality, and we've seen, the establishment of the Independent Police Oversight Authority. We've also seen the establishment of the Internal Affairs Unit, which are, independent organs that play a critical role in ensuring that the police perform their work with the use of minimal force and within the confines of the law. But we've also seen, some level of interference in the works. And my question is a recommendation. What is it that needs to be done to ensure the independence of independent organs within the government or independent institutions within the government? And, not limiting ourselves to, the two that I just mentioned, but even others, what can we do to ensure that level of independence?
Thank you. First, I'll respond to that question from two fronts. First is when it comes to institutions such as IPOA and IAU, I think they are doing well in terms of trying to investigate these police brutalities, and as the International Justice Mission, we engage with them a lot in some of the works that we do. And I think they are doing their level best. Of course, there is need to put in more resources into those organizations so that they can be able to get the necessary equipment that they require. They can be able to have the necessary resources required, because investigations are very expensive exercises. You can just imagine how much it would cost to conduct, say, 100 investigations of police killings. It's quite a huge amount of money, and therefore you require very sophisticated equipments for you to be able to preserve the evidence that would be required in court. Mm-hmm. On the issue of independence, what do we do so that we can enhance the independence of institutions? And you've said that not just limited to those two, but generally oversight institutions. I think in terms of what we can do, we have done the much we can. Because in the Constitution, we have given independent institutions constitutional power to be subjected only to the Constitution. In fact, if you look at Article 249, it provides that they are under direction or control of no power or authority. So there's nothing more you can do other than that in terms of giving them the constitutional threshold. The problem we have is something that we cannot legislate. And I remember some while back I was asked to speak on that subject at Kabarak University. And this is what I said. You cannot legislate independence of the mind. Even if you give a constitutional commission all the powers like we have given them, or an independent office like we have given them in the Constitution, and even told them no one can direct you or control you in the Constitution. But if the holders of those offices decide that they will not be independently minded, if the holders of those offices decide that the office will become an offshoot of the executive, and they refuse to to implement and to exercise the powers that they have been given by the Constitution, then it becomes difficult. It becomes difficult because we cannot legislate independent mindedness. And so I think for me, it behoves upon those who hold such offices to look at the law and see the powers they've been given and see the independence they've been given and perform those functions in accordance with the Constitution. That would be my response to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. You cannot legislate the independence of the mind.
That's very good.
The onus still rests upon the institutions and the leadership of those institutions to ensure the independence, because the power is already bestowed upon them by the Constitution. Thank you, Vincent, for reminding us the power that we hold in the authorities and the authority that we hold in the offices that we've been given and entrusted. I'd like to, as we move towards, winding this particular segment and move towards the Q&A segment, I'd like to give an opportunity to Commissioner Lucy, then I'll finish with Isabella. Commissioner Lucy, anything that you would like to add in regard to what needs to be done to strengthen the independence of our institutions?
Thank you. And I do agree that we have very good laws, starting with our Constitution and the mandate given to all government institutions, including independent Constitution and other government institutions. But I want to say that they can be challenged. We cannot just sit there and say that we leave it there. No. They are ways of challenging the institution and the way they are operating. One of them is definitely by filing a petition in Parliament. That one is well known, that if you feel that certain institutions are not working as expected, as per the Constitution and the law governing them, you can petition Parliament and Parliament can take action. At the same time, if you feel that they are inactive, there is certain action which they are not doing, then you can also challenge that institution in a court of law. We do have the judiciary, which can also push certain activities to be done through a court of law. And at the same time, we do know that these institutions do file reports in Parliament. We can also interrogate what they recommend in those reports and find out what is it that we have not done. And finally, I want to say that the citizens have a right which is enshrined in the Constitution, like I said, a right for them to wake up and challenge not just the independent Constitution, but every other institution of government if they are not performing their duties. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lucy. We have opportunities that we can take to keep institutions accountable. And you've rightfully highlighted some of them, and thank you very much for that. As we come to the close of this segment, Isabella, what are your feelings in regard to the independence of institutions in the country, and what can we do to strengthen that independence?
Thank you so much for that question. I was just listening in on what the other panelists were saying, and I think we are onto something over here. This is a very useful discussion in terms of just strengthening the independence. And I would want to simply talk about issues to do with resources and specifically budgetary allocations. We appreciate that there's a specific, or rather an important nexus between performance and independence as well as resources. Because if you want an institution to perform, for instance, IPO, and there are very many other institutions and authorities with specific mandates, if you essentially want them to perform as per, their creation or as per the statutes that formulate them, you then want to make sure that they're properly resourced, be it human resource, materially resourced, or what it is that they need in terms of ensuring that they perform their duties as need be. So when we talk about budgetary allocation, then we want to move away from politicization of budgets, or rather requests made by these particular authorities, be it independent or not. So once we move away from that, because these are institutions that are supported by the government, then we will be able to see a change. Recently, IMLO commissioned a study to look at the past 3 years in terms of how police budgets have been done, and we noted specific areas that definitely we will lobby on later in the coming year. And we noticed that there is a trend in terms of budgetary allocation, and specifically because, and we had spoken about this in the beginning of this particular discussion, that there is a link between the political body in the country and state agents, specifically the forces, so to speak. And now when you see that particular link, then you understand how to form budgetary allocation. Budgetary allocation then informs performance. Yeah, and then we'll go ahead to talk about issues of corruption and whatnot, but I will not go into that. So if we want essentially to make sure that these particular authorities perform and they're as independent as we intend for them to be, or even as the Constitution intends them to be, then we need to shift the ways in which we budget, or rather we allocate resources and funds for these particular authorities. That's all I wish to state for this one.
Thank you very much. As the saying goes, whoever plays the piper chooses the tune. So if we can be able to ensure there is independence in how resources are allocated to these institutions, and also independence in how the resources allocated are managed, then we can move towards a more independent institutions in our country. So thank you very much. We've seen a number of questions that have popped up from our listeners, so I'd like to invite my co-moderator to share some of those.
Thank you very much, James. We have several questions on the chart. The first question is, do the members of the panel think that corruption has watered down the efforts of the government towards the realization of the right to health? And the reference is to the KEMSA scandal. Maybe we could take 2, you respond, then we do another round. So I'll read the next one. If the government is adhering to the rule of law, why haven't we seen the prosecution of the police who engage in police brutality and those who engage in the misappropriation of funds during COVID-19? I think we can, now that there are only 3, we could just respond to all of them at once. The last one would be, how will or can AI be used to combat some of these pertinent issues like police brutality, and are there other reforms that are in place to combat police brutality? So maybe we could start with Vincent, if you may.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so on the issue of prosecution, sorry, I'm having a bit of network challenges. I didn't get the first question properly. Okay. I got the second one, but not the first one.
Okay, let me.
So if you don't mind, just repeat the first question, please.
Sure, I could do that. The question is, do the members of the panel think that corruption has watered down the efforts of the government towards realization of the right to health? And the reference is to the KEMSA scandal.
Yes, that question can be answered from many fronts. It's a very wide question because it brings to the fore so many. I don't take time. I'll just say that indeed corruption is an obstacle to the very scandal that the questioner is talking about. So we need to decisively come up with ways in which we can deal with corruption. I can tell you that in this country we spend so much money fighting corruption, money that can be used in doing other things, in money that can be used in development. But because we seem to have become experts in corruption, then we also have to put so much resources into fighting corruption. When you look at some of the countries that have very high integrity indexes, like Finland and Norway and Scotland, they use very minimal funds in fighting corruption, because there is even no corruption to fight, and they have very small budgets that they have put in the institutions that fight institutions, because they are required to have them because they are members of the European Union. So yes, corruption in itself becomes an impediment, and also the lengthy processes that we have seen. For example, even when you talk about KEMSA, you find that the lengthy processes, people being taken to Parliament, and we have other oversight law enforcement agencies that are investigating that. By the time that the people will be brought to book, if at all, then even prosecuting those cases in court becomes difficult, because when the cases take long to investigate, then you can just imagine what happens to the evidence. Yes, corruption is really an obstacle. Now, with the prosecution of the police, I agree with what I think it was Commissioner who said, that action is usually taken against police officers who have used excessive force or whatever. The challenge with such cases is actually that there is always cover-up from the very beginning. And so these are difficult cases, because remember, the standard of proof in court is still the same, and it is very high. So once a policeman does something and commits an offense, in fact, I remember, without going into so much details, one of the cases that we are handling is a case where the policeman shot a homeless man because of being outside past curfew hours. Now he's homeless, and he was saying that where you found me, is my home. And went and came back to now clear the scene of crime, and it was even other officers who were doing it. So the issue then becomes how do we operate in such a way that when such an instance happens, we can be able to quickly communicate. And this is where the issues of artificial intelligence comes in. How can we secure some of our streets? How can we, and all those things, so that we are able to preserve at least a record of what may have happened in a scene of crime. So that would be my response to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Isabella?
Okay, so I'd like to answer the issue of tackling police brutality using AI. This is with an appreciation of the fact that technology is core in terms of responding to human rights needs and challenges. We've seen issues of fundamental human rights violations morphing from one thing to the other. Look at something like the Floyd case, and I know this gained so much traction in the media, and we saw that this particular case was captured on a phone, right? This was a phone that brought this whole thing to the forefront. What does that say? If we are able to capture this data and probably segregate them through the use of artificial intelligence and other technological measures, who knows? We may be able to bring more people to book. We may be able to preserve our evidence. We may be able to even push for other legislations that we may not have in Kenya at the moment, that would then inform probably the evidentiary use of technological capturings or gatherings in a court of law to prove or to disprove an alleged police brutality. So in terms of artificial intelligence, I think that's a brilliant question, and I'm hoping that as we go on in terms of ensuring that we handle all the different types of police brutality cases, we will also have at the back of our mind how useful technology has been. And I would also want to speak to how INMO itself handled matters to do with reports and processing, or rather even investigating issues of police brutality during the COVID-19 period. We heavily relied on technology because we consider ourselves, and I know most people in the civil society also consider themselves frontline workers. So we only had the option of technology, having been thrown into an area where we didn't know what it even meant to work from home, yet you know that you have cases going on outside, right outside your house. So we relied heavily on technology, and if we had made proper use, or rather if we knew of avenues where artificial intelligence would be applicable, I'm thinking we would be very, very far, considering the fact that at the moment data is looked at as probably more valuable than oil, and people are saying it's even more valuable than gold. I don't know how true that is. So AI tied together with technology and then link it to the protection, or rather prevention, of any human rights violation would be a core subject for us to look at going forward. And this is with an appreciation that technology will not be something that we can get rid of if we want to adequately respond to human rights violations, specifically police brutality. And also keep in mind that if we made use of artificial intelligence systems, for instance, in our National Police Service and other avenues, we would be able to disintegrate either scenes of crime, keep data that we may need, and probably this data would be accessible to entities that may be investigating a case of police brutality. Vincent has alluded to the issue of cover-up by police officers, and I had also spoke about the same previously, what we call the blue code of silence. So if we have AI and we use it as we should be, or rather craft it to cover the cases that we have as a society, or rather as a country, then I think we would be probably getting through to some of the issues that we face in terms of either holding people accountable or bringing them to book. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You bring an interesting point, because there has always been a push and pull between technology and enforcement of human rights. And while it's easier and it fastens the process to hold individuals accountable, the counterbalance of it is it looks like a lot of state power when it's released to the wrong hands. So that is an interesting conversation I think we might want to have. And just to maybe allow Ms. Lucy to give her comments, and then we can conclude.
I just want to agree with Isabella and Chakre. That is the way to go. I can only add that we can use access to information to fight corruption. This might increase transparency and accountability because it allows journalists to carry out investigative journalism. It can also allow civil society to ask questions which otherwise they would not ask, using active disclosure by making many requests. We can also use access to information to fight police brutality, whereby the citizens themselves can ask questions and continue to ask questions. Why, what, and what can we do as citizens? Should we just wait? Can prosecution take place? Which laws can we use to fight police brutality? Then, on the other side of police, we can educate them on access to information and tell them that they need to be more accountable. Otherwise, the law will catch up with them. That's all I can say. And in artificial intelligence, I think this is an area, and the access to information we need to add. We need to use so that we can provide information to citizens as and when is required.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you very much, panelists, for availing yourselves to participate in this panel and for the discussion we have had. I just want to maybe give you a minute, each of you, to make your closing remarks, and then we can conclude the panel. And again, I'm sorry, but it appears we'll start with you, Vincent, again.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for me to have to have joined in this conversation, and I've enjoyed listening to myself. I want to thank you for the invitation, and also to thank my fellow panelists, the Commissioner and and Isabella. In my conclusive remarks, I can just say that it behoves all of us, because this country belongs to all of us. It behoves all of us to take it as our personal responsibility to see how we can assist our country, how we can develop our country in terms of all these things that we've talked about. Whereas we have government, and we place that primary responsibility to government institutions, but we then still have a civic duty as members of this republic to see to it that we put government to account, and to see to it that we put ourselves to account. Because even all these people employed in government are Kenyans. They are chosen from amongst us. Yeah. And so to me, sometimes when we talk about these issues, it points out to a societal problem, because however much there is a turnover in government institutions, and we still see some of these things, then it means that there's a societal problem that we must tackle. The policemen we are talking about are Kenyans. They are appointed from amongst us. So if they do these things, then it points to a larger infraction within our society, and it behoves all of us to see to it how we can deal with that, even as we educate better the upcoming generation. So thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Vincent. I will go to Isabella.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I want to thank KUSOL and AKMCC for having us. We are happy to have partnered with you. It's very refreshing to just engage in this particular discussion, as well as to know that we are reaching out to students who, have the potential to then come and join the workforce in various areas to help in preventing, or rather ensuring, that human rights are upheld. And for me, my closing remark would be to just ensure that we also do not forget that this particular discussion has been limited to various facets of maybe either our areas of work or issues that we've interacted with closely. I know with the coming of COVID, there have been various layers of issues that we may not even be able to cover while we're given a year to discuss, because there are mental issues, economical issues, and so many other things such as GBV that probably we may not have adequately covered. But given the time and our areas of expertise, we may have limited that to a given type of discussion. And as I conclude, I would also just want to talk about the fact that we need to ensure that we hold each other accountable, even as civil societies, in terms of our partnerships, in terms of our collaborative areas, and in terms of resource allocation. I may not be able, probably as INLU, I may not be able to take up something, but another entity is able to take up something. Are we able to collaborate to just ensure that we are responding and preventing various facets of human rights violations? And another thing I would want to talk about is innovation. I spoke about the electioneering process as well as the COVID-19 time. And if we are able to be innovative enough, we may be able to capture the crisis that we normally want to call the twin crisis that may be facing Kenya as we speak right now. So if we are going to be innovative, if we're going to use whatever it is that we can use to ensure that we prevent rather than respond, that would be a great thing. And in terms of partnerships, are we able to then look at sustainable partnerships? Because I doubt any entity would work by itself, be it government, be it civil society. COVID-19 has just shown us that. So are we able to partner, and in what way are we partnering? Are we going to structure? Are we going to limit it to a given area of maybe distribution or performance? That is left to us. And that does not mean that maybe civil society is better than government or government is better than civil society. No. If we have areas of collaboration, then I think that's something we need to look at. So that being put on the table should then maybe ensure that we are working for the same cause. Our prerogative is human rights, with or without COVID. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Isabella. And finally, Honorable Commissioner, you can have the last word.
host for having requested us to speak with Isabella and Shahare. We are truly grateful. And to say that this has been an eye-opener to me as a commissioner, that we need to do more, we need to engage more, and to discuss issues that pertains to our mandate and that can address Kenyans in a better way. I also want to state clearly that as a country, we are heading to a very difficult year, the year of elections, and access to information can be used by all Kenyans to ensure that we have a year and that the vote will continue to go on even as information is provided as and when it's requested. Further, I want to state that there was a question on vulnerable groups, that is women and girls, who are truly affected even by corruption and police brutality. And as a commission, we have highlighted the group, and we are working to ensure that they get access to information because they are disadvantaged. They are at the rural level. They do not have access to information using the number of platforms which we know, yet they are truly affected by what we are discussing today, including COVID-19. So as a commission, I want to assure you that we are going to mashinani and we will help the marginalized, including women and girls, to access information as and when is necessary. And thank you very much. I look forward to partnering with all of you present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of words from me. First of all is to thank the All Kenyan Committee for inviting us to moderate this panel. Also to thank the panelists for creating time, for spending almost 2 hours of your time with us this morning. I am truly grateful for the time, for your insights, and for your openness to this discussion as we've had. To the participants who've been with us all through the 2 hours, we are thankful, even those that dropped off at some point. I want to thank you for participating in this discussion, and we hope that we'll have a more robust discussion even as we go by on the issues that affect us. This is our country. We have to fight for it, we have to talk about it, and we have to defend it from internal and external attacks. I'll give a chance to my co-moderator to give his final remarks and conclude the panel. Yes.
As my co-moderator said, thank you very much to our panelists. We apologize that Zipporah wasn't able to join us. However, for the panelists that were able to join us, thank you very much for the great opportunity to share your wisdom and insight into this conversation. To the hundreds of listeners who are watching us on different platforms across the globe, thank you very much for creating time to be part of this conversation. And as we close, we have been fed this narrative that we need to have collective responsibility to the rights of each other, which is a good narrative, but it does not exonerate the government from its obligation to fulfill, protect, and promote human rights. Those are my final remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.